All right, my friends, I have had one frozen margarita from the bar across the street. I have received one backhanded compliment on a singing video of mine. I am a little drunk and a little aggressive, and I am ready to talk to you about True Blood. True Blood and Hurricane Katrina, and also Rocket Money, but we're gonna get there. Sex, drugs, and light political commentary. What could possibly go wrong? True Blood is a 2008 HBO television show. It is based on the Sookie Stackhouse books. I think they're technically called the Southern Vampire Chronicles, but I've always just known them as the Sookie Stackhouse books because Sookie Stackhouse is such a great name. It's HBO adaptation of that. Hurricane Katrina is a hurricane, but also not, because when we're talking about Hurricane Katrina, we're not actually usually talking about a hurricane. What we're talking about when we say Hurricane Katrina is usually the fallout, the catastrophe, the devastation that came in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And that is not a hurricane. That's not the fault of the hurricane. That is the fault of neoliberalism. That is neoliberalism working correctly. That is capitalism doing what it is designed to do: devastate communities and fail to help those in need. That's the point. So, really great start to a video essay. We're really kicking it off with like a really positive energy. But if we wanted to talk about hurricanes, if we wanted to actually talk about hurricanes like the physical event, we could talk about the 1998 Hurricane Georges. I really hope it's Georges and not Jorge's. It wouldn't be. No, I need to look it up. Right.
I'm going to continue to be
two ads. I can't find how to pronounce it. In 1998, Hurricane George built up a wall of water that is 17 feet high. Think about the guy that you know who says he's 6 feet tall. We're talking about two and three of him. We're talking about three of the guy who says that he's 6 feet tall, right? Because 6 feet tall times three would be 18 feet tall, but no guy who says that they're 6 feet tall is actually 6 feet tall. They're usually 5'10". So I think it evens out, right? We're talking about three men who say that they're 6 foot on their Tinder profiles, right? That amount of water is barreling towards southeastern Louisiana when, by stroke of sheer pure luck, the surge of water collapses under chaotic winds as the hurricane just like turns like 2 degrees, like right before it hits land. And the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, survives by the skin of its teeth, okay? The skin of its teeth and the grace of whatever God you believe in. So in 2001, in October of 2001, 3 years after that near catastrophe, an in-depth study of the Gulf Coast's infrastructure and disaster preparedness plans are done. And the Scientific American reports in October of 2001 that New Orleans is a disaster waiting to happen. The Scientific American goes into the reasons why, right? There's a lot of talk of like levees and deltas and flooding and bowls. I assume that these are things that make a lot more sense to people who live very close to water and have lived very close to water and what it means to live at sea level and not sea level. I don't fully understand it, so I'm kind of glossing over it, but there's a lot of talk of that, and they surmise to say that the way that it looked in 2001, the way that everything was going, if a storm like that were to properly hit, extensive evacuation would be impossible because the surging water would cut off the few escape routes. Scientists at Louisiana State University who have modeled hundreds of possible storm tracks on advanced computers predict that more than 100,000 people could die. The body bags wouldn't go very far. Then in the summer of 2004, a year before Hurricane Katrina hits, the state of Louisiana puts in a request to FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Association, and they request funds to develop an in-depth contingency plan for a powerful hurricane. The request was refused. Disaster mitigation, advanced government measures to make the effects of the disaster less devastating, was one of the programs that was gutted under the Bush administration. There was no government funds available for them to plan for a disaster like this because George Bush's administration cut them. Yet that same summer, FEMA awarded $500,000 contracts to a private firm called Innovative Emergency Management and tasked Innovative Emergency Management with coming up with a catastrophic hurricane disaster plan for Southeast Louisiana and the city of New Orleans. So instead of giving the state the money that they asked for to come up with a plan for themselves, private company that they awarded this $500,000 contract to spared no expense. It brought together more than 100 experts, and when money ran out, they went back to FEMA for more, and they were given more money. The bill for the disaster preparedness plan by Innovative Emergency Management in southeastern Louisiana came to over $1 million. Just the cost of coming up with the plan, right? Paying the people who are doing the thinking and the logistics. They came up with scenarios for mass evacuation, for covering everything from delivering water to instructing neighborhood communities to identifying empty lots that could be immediately transformed into trailer parks and housing areas for the displaced. And yet, when push comes to shove in August of 2005, as Hurricane Katrina comes barreling towards southeastern Louisiana, none of those disaster preparedness and mitigation measures are put into action. Instead, the city's wealthiest individuals with insurance, cars, friends and family outside the city, and general time to spare self-evacuate, leaving the poor and uninsured residents, many of whom have lived in this area for generations and don't have anyone else outside of their family to go to in other states because everyone lives here. They are left stranded. The city of New Orleans issues its first mandatory evacuation ever at 10 a.m. on August 28, 2005, just after the storm was upgraded from Category 3 to Category 5. And on August 29th, less than or exactly 24 hours later, the storm makes landfall, which means it hits the land. It hits New Orleans, and the levees flood. Levees are like things that stop water. The city is flooded, and the trouble really begins, which is like a bummer of a way to start a video essay. Sorry. What can I say? The catastrophic failures or perhaps unquestionable successes of neoliberalism do tend to be a bit of a bummer. They do tend to put a damper on things, but if you came here expecting to see a video about True Blood, you came here expecting a video about vampires and racism and Alexander Skarsgård, have no fear. I intend to give that to you. I do intend to provide you with that video experience. I will tell you about how much I love Eric Northman and why Bill Compton deserves to die. I have not strayed so far from the path laid out to me by the trickster god that lives inside Stephenie Meyer's body. I know my place. I know who I am. I know what we're here for. I understand that. But I also feel like it's time. I feel like I've had enough time away from the Mars video, away from the Elon Musk of it all. And I'm gearing up for the Twilight video that I will make at 100,000 subscribers. And I think it's time to do it. I think it's time to look at vampires and capitalism, which brings me to today's sponsor, which is Rocket Money. Some of you might know. Let me get the box to show you. Huh? I am saving up for an album, and I really want to get on top of my expenses. So I need a way to keep track of where all of my bills are coming from, everything that's coming in and everything that's coming out, so that I can save as much as I can so I can make this album. Well, lucky for me, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. I've been using Rocket Money since like 2023 or 2024. I got it from a Hank Green sponsorship. Fun fact. So this brings me one step closer to Hank Green, which is great. Bella. She's very excited. Bella, should we tell them about Rocket Money? Say, Rocket Money is an easy-to-use app that lets you save more and manage your money better. Rocket Money is an easy-to-use app that lets you save more and manage your money better. Just something I so desperately need. Rocket Money automatically makes lists of all your subscriptions so that you can keep track of them all in one place. You could cancel the ones that you don't want anymore with just a few taps. And Rocket Money may even be able to help you get a refund for some of the lost money. Rocket Money has helped its users save up to $740 a year when you use its premium features. They've also helped members save over $500 million in canceled subscription services, which is a crazy number. You can go to rocketmoney.com/bizbarkley or click the link that is in the description and get started for free. You can also unlock even more features with premium. So, oh my gosh. They're not going to sponsor me again if you keep interrupting. How am I supposed to save for your very expensive diet? She does not have an expensive diet. But you could have an expensive diet and I could pay for it because Rocket Money helps me save. And Rocket Money can help you save too. I'm way off the script at this point. Go to rocketmoney.com/bizbarkley or click the link in the description and get started for free and unlock even more features with premium. Thank you. Cheers. Back to people who don't want you to save your money. Part 1. Vampire capitalism. This is not a marker. This is a tied to go stick. You guys know I have a pointer. I do have one. And I really want it. I can't find it. I can't find the pointer. I kind of thought it was a sign. I thought maybe I shouldn't even make the video if I don't have the pointer. Maybe the gods are telling me to stop. But truth will out, okay? We're using this. Vampire capitalism, all right? Talking about vampire capitalism. Let's go. Let's go. Capitalism is dead labor. Labor which vampire-like lives only by sucking living labor and lives the more labor it sucks. Karl Marx, my friends. Oh, a Marxism reference, a Marx quote. Marx is back in the land of Biz Barkley. Welcome, sir. We have missed you. Thank you for returning. If you don't get that joke, it's because you didn't see my Mars Needs Musk video. I don't know what it's called at this point. I keep trying to different titles out to see if maybe one of them will hit. Nobody seems to care about the brave little toaster going to Mars and how it relates to Marxism and Elon Musk's desperate attempts to go to Mars. Nobody else seems interested in that. But if you are, I did a whole ass video on it. A lot of those themes are going to come up again here when we're talking about vampire capitalism. But to begin, why are we talking about vampire capitalism? So, without further ado, Tara Thornton. Oh my god, is this right in front of her face? Tara Thornton. This is Tara. The first time that we meet Tara, when she is being rudely interrupted in a convenience hardware store situation by some lady who is demanding that she tell her where something is at this store. It's a little ridiculous because Tara is very clearly busy. She is very clearly busy reading. Now, does Tara work at the convenience store? Yes. Regardless, my point still stands that she was rudely interrupted. And because we support both women's rights and women's wrongs, if not mostly women's wrongs on this channel, we have no problem with Tara tearing this woman a new one and getting fired/quitting. Girlie was just trying to calmly read about the parasitic nature of capitalism preying on the vulnerable. It's not her fault that this lady didn't think to call ahead. Anyway, Tara is reading, and she is reading a book that is called The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, and that is going to come up later, so put a big pin in that. Shock doctrine. There's a little $sign there, so you know that it's about capitalism. We're gonna get into it later. Tara is hilarious. Tara is so funny, in addition to being very well read. Tara, this might just be my personal opinion. It might just be my personal taste, but I do find it very, very funny when people just lie. I get some people like potty humor. I like lies. I think they're funny. I think the fact that she multiple times throughout the first episode alone, let alone the show, when someone's like mildly annoying her, will just spin a tale. She's very funny. She also gets treated like shit, okay? Like, when I went into this, I knew that she was treated poorly because this is a Princess Weeks fan channel and I love Princess Weeks, and Princess Weeks said in a video of hers that Tara is put through like a crazy amount of trauma. And I believe her. I believe Princess Weeks when she says things. I didn't doubt the Oracle, okay? Like I could not have fathomed the amount of shit that they put her through. Just wasn't on my radar. Like I didn't know it could be that bad. You know what I mean? It's my litmus, my scale, my understanding of how much shit someone could be through was not prepared for what they do to poor Tara. It's crazy. It's crazy. Also, she's named after the plantation. There's a whole thing about my lovely girl here that we could go into. We will touch on elements of it, but I'm not really the person you want to hear about Tara's perspective and what, Tara's place in the narrative means. Princess is. So she's made several wonderful videos, especially about this topic. The one is the Confederate vampire videos. And then there's another one about sort of race bending characters, because Tara in the books that True Blood is based off of is white. So, making her black has all kinds of implications. Point is, anyway, when we meet Tara, she's reading. And I love when characters read on screen because I love to look at what they're reading. I think it's really interesting. But I was really curious which book she was reading, and so I looked it up. And I was like, whoa, what? Because they don't mention it. And I just thought, I just knew in that moment that it was time. So let's back it up. The Vampire is an 1816 short story telling the story of a hot, rich orphan, the best kind of orphan, named Aubrey. He finds himself deeply entangled in the mess of hot, rich, orphan until proven otherwise, Lord Ruthven. Aubrey and Lord Ruthven start out as friends. They are gallivanting around the world before Ruthven evidently insults one too many people, seduces one too many underage women, and Aubrey is like, I'm out. Sorry about it. He goes to Greece and falls in love with a woman who is almost immediately murdered. Right away, girlie's throat is yeeted so far out of her body, you'd think she never had one in the first place. And all that's left behind is this creepy dagger. It's a whole thing. All the locals are like, vampire! Vampire! And Aubrey, of course, is like, no, nah. And then on a completely unrelated note, Ruthven shows back up. So weird. It's very convenient because not only did Aubrey's girlfriend just die, everything seems to be going fine until spaghetti-o, they are attacked. And either way, one thing in front of the other, Ruthven ends up on his deathbed. And he basically, his dying wish is hey, never talk about me ever. Don't tell anybody about me ever. He's like, ever? And he's like, okay, for a year and one day. Okay, don't tell anybody about me for 1 year and 1 day. Oddly specific, but go off. Aubrey feels like he kind of can't say no. She sort of says, sure. Ruthven dies. Aubrey goes through his things and dips out. I tell you that he went through his things because he went through his things and he found a set of daggers that looks just like the dagger that he found when his girlfriend died. Ruthven killed his girlfriend is the conclusion that he comes to, and then he goes home, okay? Broad strokes, people, broad strokes. Aubrey goes home, finds out, surprise! Ruthven is alive! Ruthven is alive and well and engaged to his sister. Aubrey's sister, not Ruthven's sister. Ruthven is engaged to Aubrey's sister. It wouldn't be a total shock if Ruthven was engaged to Ruthven's sister, because this is a story that I'm talking about on my channel, and that seems to increase the likelihood for incest by 55%. But it's not the case. It's Ruthven is engaged to Aubrey's sister, and Ruh-roh, because when Aubrey went through Ruthven's things, he found the dagger that matched the dagger that killed his girlfriend. Therefore, i.e., 6 + 6 = 7. Ruthven killed his girlfriend. Ruthven's probably going to kill his sister. Ooh, but silence. The bit is silence because he said that he promised not to say anything. Remember? Get it? Okay. Problem is that Aubrey cannot tell anyone about the fact that Ruthven has definitely killed his girlfriend and is probably going to kill his sister. Turns out when he said he felt like he couldn't say no, he really couldn't say no. And he physically is magically unable to say anything about it. Big bummer. Big bummer. He can't say anything for a year and a day, which would, theoretically could be fine, right? It theoretically would be fine. He could just wait it out, except womp womp. Ruthven and Aubrey's sister's wedding is scheduled for the day before his promise ends. Ooh, just in time for Ruthven to marry Aubrey's sister, take all her money and status, kill her, and leave. Dun dun dun. Now, who does that sound like? Who does that sound like? Does that sound like somebody else that we know? I get to talk about Lord Byron. Oh, my friends, my friends, my friends. If you were starting to think that story sounded familiar, you are correct. Because that story, interestingly enough, was written on the same night as Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. This is an infamous night in sort of literary history during a crazy storm at a villa in Geneva during the summer of the year without a summer, because the rain was cray-cray. The weather was nuts and it was pouring rain. Somebody was like, we don't have cable. Let's all write short story. Nobody did, except for two people, apparently. Mary Shelley, who wrote what would eventually go on to be Frankenstein, one of the richest texts ever. Like, it's kind of crazy. And also this. Also the beginnings of what would become the vampire. And it's written by John Polidori, who was, drumroll please, Lord Byron's doctor. You know how John Green has that Everything is Tuberculosis book that you can buy and read about the fact that everything is tuberculosis? There are lots of really wonderful, helpful places that you can donate your money to if you have money to spare that will help bring tuberculosis testing and medication to places that need it, because there is no reason that tuberculosis should be killing anybody in the year of our Lord 2025, except for the fact that we allow it to kill people in poor countries. You know how John Green does that Everything is Tuberculosis thing? I could do that with Lord Byron. I could do Everything is Lord Byron. I swear to you, I can connect Lord Byron to anything, including tuberculosis, very easily. That's a top tier. You can throw a pebble and hit reasons that Lord Byron is connected to tuberculosis, because Lord Byron low-key wanted to die of tuberculosis. He was like, that seems sexy. That's hot. I think he just thought death was hot in general. The Romantics, everything was hot to them. Like, I think I've said this before, everything in the Romantic period gets like a very sexy makeover. Death, narcissism, debt, everything is turned into this like just like version of itself. It's very sexually charged. Everything is very sexually charged, including the horror and the romance that was popping up, including the vampire. And the vampire reportedly was inspired by Lord Byron's behavior, which shocks absolutely no one, because Lord Byron was in fact constantly in debt, and yet people constantly kept lending him money. He was constantly cheating on people, and yet people constantly were sleeping with him. From childhood, this man really seemed to have this effect on people where they just couldn't say no to him. His mother, his nannies, school friends, teachers, everyone reported in their own way and in their own words and letters and times, they just couldn't say no. They just couldn't help but give him whatever he wanted, which is crazy. And it's giving vampire, okay? Vampires have always had this like hypnotic effect on characters in various tellings. Sometimes it's extremely literal, especially in modern takes. I'm looking at you, Vampire Diaries. Compulsion is very straightforward. I fuck with it for sure. Interview with a Vampire also has this. They more like just like ambiguous mind games. And True Blood also has this. True Blood has glamoring. It's very much just compulsion. If you know Vampire Diaries, I'm assuming that you probably know Vampire Diaries before you know True Blood. I think that True Blood was a bit older, and knowing my demographics, I think that most of you probably know more about the Vampire Diaries than you know about True Blood, which I also did, but not because I'm young. I'm 6,550 years old. I've been around the block. I just never watched True Blood because True Blood has a lot of sex. That's the reason. True Blood has a lot of sex, and I'm a prude. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. Like, and I lock me up, take me away. I'm sorry. I can't watch it. I feel like a voyeur. I feel like a voyeur when I watch it. So anyway, I'm so off track. Glamoring seems to be used to persuade people to forget or remember things differently and to, let you into their house or be quiet, things like that. It's no surprise looking back that Lord Byron's behavior inspired a vampire character, because we have so many vampire characters that are inspired by the character that Lord Byron inspired. But it's interesting because not only was it written on that famous night in literary history, but this is like the first time that the vampire is brought into English language literature. It's obviously been in translation. Dracula and Carmilla, there are vampire stories, have been around before this. This is not the first vampire story, but this is like more or less credited with being the first time that an original English language work was about the vampire. And it was very successful. It was extremely successful. So successful, in fact, that it reportedly inspired the 1819 American work The Black Vampire by Uriah Derek Darcy, who does not appear to have been a real person. Took me a hot minute to figure this one out. Because when you Google him, a picture comes up. Anyway, appears to have been an anagram for another author. But regardless, this is credited as the first black vampire story, which features, wait for it, a black vampire. The Black Vampire follows a young boy who is brought to the French colony of Saint Domingo on a slave ship. However, all of the people from that ship mysteriously die as soon as they are sold into slavery. All of them except for one, our main young boy, right? And as soon as he is sold, the person who bought him panics because all of the other slaves are dying, and he tries to kill him several times. Only every time he tries to kill this boy, the boy's body just washes back up ashore, comes back to life. Eventually, the boy who has returned from the dead throws his master person, who's named Mr. Person, into the fire. He throws him into the fire, and it is presumed that he then goes on to kill Mr. Person's infant son. A fact that is so horrifying that Mr. Person dies from the shock when he wakes up and finds out that his infant son is dead. And like, oh wow, womp womp, too bad, so sad, you're a slave owner, I don't care. Anyway, Mr. Person's widow moves on with her life, finds herself entangled with a prince who takes her to the grave of her dead husband's, plural. She has multiple. It's a lot. He takes her to the grave of her husband's, turns her into a vampire, raises both of her husbands from the dead, and makes them like fight to the death. And then he, I think, just like lets Mr. Person and his wife go off and travel. They end up at a vampire rally for emancipation. The rally is crashed by soldiers who kill the vampires except for Mr. Person and his wife, because one of the soldiers is secretly working with the prince, and that soldier also happens to be their long lost dead infant son that the prince killed all those years ago. They get turned, somebody turns them back into humans. I think it's the infant son turns them back into humans. He gives them the cure. They are human again. Everything seems fine, except the wife is pregnant with the vampire prince's baby. And that's that. There's a lot going on in The Black Vampire. What's important here is that The Black Vampire is set against the backdrop of the Haitian Revolution. And it centers around a black slave who is being brought to a new world and turned into a vampire, and then gets his revenge in a way. The exploited becomes the exploiter, and there is punishment for the exploiter. In addition to having this connection to the Haitian Revolution, it also stands as evidence in the United States, because it's an American story, as evidence of what has since become known as the Panic of 1819, which is the first economic crisis in the United States. A crisis that is caused by the deregulation of state banks and laissez-faire economic practices driven by rugged individualism and good old-fashioned libertarianism. Nobody was watching and everyone was being selfish is what that means. Individualism is a social theory favoring freedom and action for individuals over collective state control. And libertarianism is a political philosophy that advocates for minimal state interaction and intervention in economic affairs and the private lives of citizens. Libertarians are the people who like go and they stand in like government buildings and they just like look shady until someone asks them what they're doing there, and then they say, I have a right to be here, I don't have to give you anything. The people who are like, I can make a citizen's arrest. That ideology is what caused this Panic of 1819 when the economy crashed, and there were really bad side effects. And we can see that in the text of The Black Vampire. It includes passages like, the accomplished dandy absorbs in the forced and unnatural excitement of his senseless orgies the lifeblood of that wealth. The fraudulent trafficker in stock and merchandise sucked his whole substance of 100 honest men. The corrupted and senseless clerk, who being placed near vitals of a moneyed institution himself exhausted to feed the appetite of sharpers. brokers, country bank directors and their disciples, all whose hunger and thirst for money, unsatisfied with the tardy progression of honest industry, preyed on the heart and liver of honest industry. The empiric who fills his own stomach while he empties his shop into the bowels of the hypochondriac. That's a crazy line. That's crazy. Empties his shop into the bowels of the hypochondriac is nuts. That's crazy. Anyway, the Panic of 1819 was caused by a lack of regulation on banking specifically. Private banking interests and their allies sought to evade or resist any threat to the profitability of their local enterprises, including the regulatory influence of a government bank limiting easy credit. What they're saying here is private banking interests and their allies, so private banks and people with a lot of money, sought to evade or resist, get around, break the law, under the table, any threat to the profitability of their local enterprise, threat to the profitability, anything that will stop them from making the most money possible, anything that could even remotely cap or hinder their ability to exploit people of their local enterprises. Various local businesses take out loans so that they can sell things to people. Banks make money on loans. They give a loan out, they charge interest, they make money on that interest. That's how that works. If people can't pay these loans back, they're going to have a problem. And so they were giving way too many loans out and taking cuts and taking interest from that when these people could not pay those loans back, and eventually they default on those loans. Does that sound familiar? Oh wow, it's almost like that time that the US let banks sell people insane home loan mortgages with crazy discounted rates that would very quickly skyrocket beyond their ability to pay them and then send tumbling into sheer and utter ruin. Brought to you by Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie in a bathtub. Almost like that, huh? The 2007 housing crisis is laid out in way more detail in The Big Short, which genuinely I think you should watch. I was very against watching it for a while because everybody that recommended it to me was like annoying about it, but I did watch it after I watched the Folding Ideas video on crypto, and that video starts with a really great breakdown of the housing crisis and what caused it. And it got me really interested in like how that happened. And so I watched The Big Short, and and according to people who know more about money and banking than I do, it's a good explanation. It's a good film. Ryan Gosling's in it. I'll watch anything Ryan Gosling does. It's fine. You can watch that if you want more. But basically, really a group of nasty, greedy, wealthy individuals crept up on and exploited poor people and then did not help them in the aftermath. That is what happened, which brings us back to Louisiana in 2008. While the city of New Orleans is still rebuilding, still working to rebuild its infrastructure, people are still recovering physically, mentally, and financially, which we are going to get to, I promise. 2005 to 2009. Oh, here, we have FEMA Help Us. This one's also right. Oh, you can't see that one. It's there too. But before we get to New Orleans and Southeast Louisiana, we're going to travel up to Northeastern Louisiana to the fictional town of Bonton, because the fictional town of Bonton, Louisiana is about to get its shit fucking rocked by vampires. This is where we come in. How many hours are we into the video? How many minutes? We're on page 6. We're like 22 minutes in. Now we're talking about True Blood. This is where True Blood starts. True Blood starts in Bonton, Louisiana, in this little tiny bar with our leading lady, Miss Sookie Stackhouse. Who is Sookie Stackhouse, you ask? She's a waitress. Sookie Stackhouse is a waitress, and her life starts when a vampire walks into her bar. And I say that not because she didn't have a life or wasn't valuable as a person before that. I say that because Sookie Stackhouse has never been so stoked in her entire life. Sookie Stackhouse has been waiting for this. She has been waiting for a vampire to walk into her bar. She has been on the hunt, spiritually speaking, for a vampire because Sookie Stackhouse is a telepath. So she's weird, right? She can hear people's thoughts. She doesn't know how. She doesn't know why. Most of her friends and family know. It's sort of been that way forever. Everyone just sort of rolls with it, which I kind of love. Everyone's just like busy. They're like, I gotta go to work, Sookie. Like, I don't know. Like, don't listen to me jacking off in the shower. I don't know what else to tell you. So Sookie, I can hear you picturing me naked Stackhouse is working in a bar called Merlot's. Also in Merlot's, we have some of Sookie's coworkers, which includes Arlene, who's got a tiny little picture here, but small but mighty. She is dating a guy named Renee, who has a rough Cajun accent, but is more famously the guy from Once Upon a Time who they had to kill off in order to justify putting Emma Swan with Captain Hook. That's a different video, though. I think there's another waitress. I think it's Dawn is there at this point. Can't get into it. Also present, we have Lafayette. Lafayette is also present. Lafayette is our gorgeous, fabulous gay line cook. I don't know what a line cook is, but he cooks. We also have, shock of all shocks, Sam Merlot. I forgot to print out a picture of Sam. I'll put him on the screen. I don't really care for Sam anyway, so not that bummed about it, but he owns the bar. He's Sookie's boss and is in love with her in a way that feels very weird because she's canonically like 25 and he's definitely not. Also her boss is a slightly more age-appropriate romance later, followed by another questionably young love interest. And look, Sam grows on me like a tiny bit, okay? Like the tiniest bit later in the seasons because he can be funny, but he's mostly an eye roll. Most of the time he's an eye roll because he's mostly just following Sookie around like a lovesick puppy. Anyway, it's a dog-eat-dog world out here. That's not a fight I'm gonna win. Back to the vampires. The vampires are here. The vampire who walks in the bar, capital T, capital V. The vampire that Sookie has been waiting for is, drumroll please, not worth your time or money. Oh, sorry about it. Bill Compton. He's the only person who has been strategically put behind where I'm sitting in this. Confederate soldier, vampire Bill Compton. That's not the only reason that I hate him, but it's one of them. I hate Bill Compton. I'm a certified Bill Compton hater. We have no time or energy for him. I don't fuck with Bill Compton. I don't give a shit about Bill Compton. Anyway. You might be thinking, like, what do you mean Sookie has been waiting for a vampire to walk in the bar? You really glossed over that one, Biz. I should probably tell you the premise of the show. The premise of True Blood is a sort of alternate timeline where vampires have existed amongst humans forever. They've always sort of been around in the shadows. Dun dun dun. Then Japanese scientists developed a synthetic blood that is able to sustain them as well as human blood. Now, they don't really go into super detail about this on the show, and if they did, I missed it. But it's made clear that the true blood was developed for medicinal use, which makes so much more sense. And it's funny because I didn't question it at the time, but like, yeah, why would they be trying to create a synthetic blood for a population of creatures that they don't know exists? Of course, that's not what they were doing. We're still letting tuberculosis kill people. No, it was being developed for like hospitals or natural disasters and situations and war zones. But it just incidentally has this ability to keep a vampire alive the same way that human blood does, which gives them the freedom to come out in the open and live amongst the humans, since they don't have to murder us anymore. I mean, in their defense, it is hard to be accepted by a society that knows you might like accidentally kill them, you know? Throwback. Anyway, what was I saying? I say accidentally. Vampires in this universe don't really accidentally kill people that often. It's not quite like Vampire Diaries where it's like, I'm a ripper! A ripper doesn't stab. Nor is it like Twilight where everyone's a ripper. It does happen, but for the most part they have more control. It does seem like new vampires don't necessarily have a lack of control as much as like a lack of tact, and old vampires simply don't want to have any control. To be fair, if you've got it, flaunt it, right? Point is, vampires have existed amongst humans forever, but have only recently come out of the closet. Come out of the coffin. But I joke, but it is honestly very funny. It's very funny. It's very camp. So the vampires all come out of the coffin at the same time. They make one announcement in all of the languages on all of the broadcast network possible places, and they tell everybody, hi, we're here. Don't worry. We have an alternative to drinking your blood. But just like FYI, we would love to come to the movies. Please, can you start playing the movies after midnight? That would be great. Please, can you open the DMV after 7 p.m.? Please. I want to drive a car. So they all come out of the coffin. And when they come out of the coffin, the assumption is that they're coming out of the coffin, and because they don't have to steal from humans anymore, that they won't, right? Now,
She's my mama!
think about these other vampire stories, right? The Black Vampire, the Vampire Dracula, Carmilla, even the more recent sort of Anne Rice's vampire stories, they are all about these sort of dark, evil creatures and presences that slide into the lives of humans under false pretenses, right? Carmilla, if you know Carmilla is this like young looking teenage girl vampire, essentially, who feigns illness and tricks her way into the family home of our main girly protagonist, and they strike up an extremely borderline explicitly sexual relationship. The book is not as fun as it sounds like it's gonna be. I was gonna make a video on Carmilla, and then I read Carmilla properly and I was like, oh, the web show was better. And the web show wasn't that good. Don't come for me. I loved it, but point is, that's the horror of these vampires, is that they are going to sort of use their hypnotic powers to seduce and murder women and steal from men, and our protagonists just don't realize it until it's too late. They are usually very wealthy, aristocratic, attractive creatures. They also thrive on this shadowy existence. They benefit from staying in the darkness, staying out of sight, out of mind, just sort of hoarding wealth and manipulating people in private. Because when you're under the radar, you can avoid human repercussions. People don't know you're doing something wrong if they don't even know you're there in the first place. The 2007, 8, 9 recession was the result of a lot of shadowy figures exploiting and manipulating people who trusted them with their money. The banks and the brokers and Wall Street were sucking the life out of these people, and they had no idea. And when it all came crashing down, those same people who were exploited also paid the price. The government bailed out the banks. They didn't suffer the way that people who lost their homes did. And this bubble bursting on such a grand scale with such visible, sort of visceral side effects, especially during the rise of like the internet and social media and mass communication, it woke a lot of people up to the realities of the American free market capitalist dream, to these shadowy figures that were lurking behind bank walls and government bailouts, right? These sort of inner workings and the selfishness and the greed that was powering the systems that we rely on as lay people was exposed, and the monsters behind it were sort of dragged into the light. They may have not had to pay consequences, but people saw what happened. The vampires in True Blood similarly have been around for a while, and they have been living amongst humans for a while, and they've been living, interestingly, not at all like nomads, right? They're not living like the Twilight vampires who are just kind of running around keeping to themselves and then like occasionally running into some weird cosplaying reclusive gay vampires in a basement in Italy who will kill them if they sneeze too loudly. Like, it's not that. Like, the vampires in True Blood have been living amongst humans secretly, but they have a whole legal and political system and the social structure that they adhere to within their world. And that legal, political, social, economic system that they adhere to is feudalism. Feudal just means kings and queens and shit. Vampires coming out of the coffin means that they are no longer able to operate independently from humans. The goal, some say, is for the vampires to mainstream, to essentially live as humans, only like at night, right? However, the structure of the vampire world is so different from the structure of the human world that it causes a lot of problems. The feudal system that the vampires have been existing with under the radar, sort of parallel to, alongside, in the underbelly of humans, is not compatible with the capitalist free market that humans have been exercising, at least in the United States. According to Wikipedia, feudalism is a combination of legal, economic, military, cultural, and political customs that flourished in medieval Europe from the 9th to 15th centuries. Broadly defined, it is a way of structuring society around relationships derived from the holding of land in exchange for service or labor. And Marx's whole thing is about how humanity and like societies go from feudal systems into capitalist systems because of the exploitation of labor and the commodification of goods. Big words. I know, those are big words. It's fine. The system that he draws is called historical materialism. You don't actually need to know this. Capitalism basics: humans do labor, labor makes goods, goods are sold. Okay, big buzzwords are labor, obviously the work that humans do, goods, also called commodities, commodification. Commodities are things that are sold. Commodification is the act of starting to find a way to sell something. Mode/means of production, you might also hear. This just means the materials to make the things. So if you want to sell a t-shirt, you need to make the t-shirt, you need the cotton, the fabric, the machines, things like that. The last buzzword that you need to know for this video is capital. And capital is kind of a weird concept because it's a noun, but it is technically a social relation, right? It's something you have capital when you are the owner of the mode/means of production. If someone goes into the forest to pick berries and sells those berries to make their living, they are selling the berries and their labor that goes into picking the berries. But if you buy the forest and you put a fence around it and you charge people $5 to go in and pick the berries, you own the mode and means of production and you don't have to do any work. That's what's very attractive about capitalism, is having capital means that you don't have to do anything. You charge them to come in, you're going to make more money than you could ever make if you went and sold berries, right? And it effectively gives you a cut of whatever they make. So you have a certain level of control and ownership over the goods and commodities that are being sold by other people. If you want a really in-depth breakdown of this, I do like a whole Marxism abridged section in my Mars video. I recommend that one. I rewatched it just to brush up on my Marxism here, and I stand by it. I think it's pretty good. The thing about this like transition from feudalism into capitalism is that on first blush, like it kind of seems like a good replacement, right? Like you're going from this world where one guy is in charge of like a whole bunch of people and can basically make everybody do whatever he wants and demand land whenever he wants it and give land to whoever he wants. And it's being replaced by this idea of capitalism where like if you pay somebody else $5 to sell berries from their tree for long enough, you can eventually buy your own tree, right? The idea that you can eventually buy your own freedom and your own independence is very alluring. But what isn't super obvious right away is that the math isn't mathing. The equation for the capitalist system requires exploitation. Capitalism cannot exist without somebody getting a short end of a stick. It requires exploitation, right? It requires people to be unemployed. Unemployment is a requirement of capitalism. So when people are telling you they're going to lower unemployment, when politicians are saying that everybody should have a job, they're lying, right? Because Marx maintains that goods are bought and sold at their value. You can only sell an apple for exactly as much as an apple is worth. The only place to cut costs in order to make profit is in the labor. You can argue things that are being oversold now and today, but that's just an exploitation of the consumer and also a different conversation for a different video. Point is, the only way to make $3 on a shirt that costs $5 to make it is to underpay the person that is making it. Bottom line, capitalism is inherently exploitative. It has to be. But no one who is trying to impose capitalism on you wants you to know that, because obviously you're not going to agree to a system that exploits you. That would be crazy. So they have to dress it up in promises of upward mobility and class ascension and growth and a free market. And they give you just enough of those things, just enough ascension, just enough of an illusion of success and freedom and control so that you don't notice they are stealing from you, right? That is the only way. And when you're a group of people, vampires, who are inherently exploitative in your existence, right? Glamour people to get what you want and kill anybody in your way at any time, there's not really a reason for there to be any kind of transition from feudalism into capitalism. Like, if you can just punch someone and then make them forget it, like, there's no reason to convince them to let you punch them, right? At least within True Blood, it's kind of understood that this transition from feudalism to capitalism did not happen for the vampires. It didn't happen for them as they live sort of parallel to humanity. Right? In the US, you have, Queen Sophie Anne, my Lord and Savior, vampire queen of Louisiana. She gets to kind of dole out her punishments however she sees fit, really. She appointed Eric Northman. I love Eric Northman. And Pam. This is such a great picture. They look phenomenal. They look so good. They look so good in this picture. Anyway, she appoints him the sheriff of whatever part of Louisiana includes Bonton. And he doesn't have a choice. He just has to do it. Like, she says, "You're sheriff," and he says, "I guess I'm sheriff now." And then everybody who lives under his sheriffdom just does what he says. The sheriff can order vampires to do anything and they just have to do it. So there's no need for vampires to shift away from feudalism. It just doesn't really happen. Whether or not that's realistic is not my question. I'm not here to argue that there's no way that vampires wouldn't have figured out capitalism, but within True Blood, in the world of True Blood, they don't. They remain in their feudal system alongside humanity. So Sophie Anne appoints Eric sheriff of the area that includes Bonton. Super, super old vampire who was turned by a super duper older vampire named Godric, who is played by a teenage boy. And Eric is so fun. Eric is fun and classic moody goth vampire. And he's creepy and he's got severe daddy issues, especially when it comes to Godric, which is a whole thing. And he had made Pam a bunch of years ago. Pam is such a bitch. I love her. Pam is amazing. Pam does not have time for you at all. And she definitely doesn't have time for Sookie. My favorite thing about Pam is that Pam hates Sookie and she never stops hating Sookie. She reminds me of Catherine in the Vampire Diaries. But she doesn't have a role really beyond the fact that she is closely connected to Eric, who is the sheriff. So she gets special treatment just because he gives her special treatment, not because she was appointed it. But he can do that because he can kind of do whatever he wants. It's not a democracy. The people didn't vote on how sheriffs are supposed to treat them. He just does. So he can order Bill to do random shit for him. He can order Bill to bring Sookie to help him and make Sookie help him because Bill is a vampire, so he's under Eric's control. And Bill brought Sookie into this mess. Confederate soldier, vampire Bill Compton. Don't forget that. I used this shitty picture of him because it was the only picture I could find of him in war clothes. It's not super clear that it's a Confederate uniform here, but it is. Point is, he does this at one point. At one point, he orders Bill to bring Sookie to his bar, Fangtasia. Fangtasia, amazing, because he has figured out that Sookie can read minds and he is trying to figure out who in his bar is stealing money from the bar. And she does it. So they strike up this weird little working relationship, little triangular almost like a love triangle. Ooh, I think calling the Eric, Bill, Sookie thing a love triangle is generous. They don't spend nearly enough time on the yearning, in my opinion. And so they kind of all become entangled in this mess. And at one point, there's another vampire trying to kill Sookie. He tries to kill Sookie, and Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton steps in and kills this other vampire. And he does it in the presence of sheriff. So sheriff has to kind of report it. And as a result, the magister comes, right? Who's magister is a person who deems punishment and enforces the law. So he deems that the punishment for vampire Bill Compton taking a vampire's life is that he is forced to create a new vampire. And this is where we get Jessica. Jessica, my girl. I love Jessica. Jessica probably is my favorite character. I think she's so great. I think she's so sweet. I think she has such an interesting storyline. And she just sort of becomes Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton's like a disgruntled teenage daughter. Bring this up just because that's his punishment. His punishment is like a life for a life, right? It's very black and white. It also could have very well been the true death. The true death is what vampires call it when you are yeeted as a vampire, because you're considered dead as a vampire, right? Even legally. But if you are, out in the sun or staked, it's the true death, and it's the true death. It's the true death because it's totally up to the discretion of the person doling out the punishment. The world is structured on authority and power and force, and that's pretty much it. And while they may be extremely good at killing people who get in their way, and they may be extremely good at playing Machiavelli Monopoly, humans are far better at playing Monopoly, right? Particularly Americans, especially when it feels like the world is ending. I made this one all by myself. You could probably tell. Where did I leave off? My friends? Oh, part 2, the shock doctrine. Doctrine being a codification of beliefs or body of teachings, rules and guidelines based on beliefs or principles. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people of all kind, and to live by the Girl Scout law. Is that it? Did the Girl Scout law include God and my country? I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong. That I remembered. Why do I feel like it was to serve God and my country and to live by the Girl Scout law? Is that right? What do I think that is? Okay, wait, it's coming up. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. It's coming. It's here. Why is it? I have to screenshot this. It's there. Oh, that's the Girl Scout promise. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. That's a doctrine. To be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, and responsible for what I say and do, and to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, make the world a better place, and be a sister to every Girl Scout. That's cute. God and my country is wild. Anyway, that's a doctrine, just like there's a doctrine for neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is the thing that goes bump in the night, okay? I think that most people who are watching this are probably familiar enough with the term neoliberalism to know that it's not good, overall a bad sign when it's cropping up, right? At the very minimum, you know that it's not a good sign. The prefix neo means new. Typically, when you hear it, you can assume that it means new and worse. You don't really put neo on things that are better. But neoliberalism, new liberalism, isn't a new social liberalism. It's a new economic liberalism. It rose up in the mid-20th century, particularly in the 30s, as an economic philosophy that is actually a direct response to growing concerns that social liberalism was leading to a socialist control of the market. We are giving people too many rights. They're going to start thinking that they should be paid a fair wage. I don't want to repeat too much of the Mars video in this video, but I am going to use NASA and space travel as the example that I used to describe a free market. Believe it or not, there are not many things in the United States that haven't had a free market since we started. Countries founded on individualism and minimal government control. So most things have had a free market since the dawn of the United States of America. But space travel for a long time was a closed market. So you couldn't just go to space. Believe it or not, there was a time when you couldn't just go to space. You weren't allowed. Right? NASA was a government-funded agency, and the only people that could go to NASA and give them money to go to space was the US government. The Cold War died out, and more importantly, I'm still having this pin in my hair. After the Cold War died out, and more importantly, after the Challenger exploded, the government could no longer justify spending billions of taxpayer dollars to go to space. They decided in the early 2000s then that the solution was to open the market, basically, and they had a competition. They would award government contracts with NASA to the companies that could make a cheaper, better way to get to space. That very quickly spiraled out of control, and now the United States government is indebted to private individuals, and we cannot go to space. NASA cannot go to space. We cannot afford to go to the moon. We cannot afford to mine asteroids when that becomes a thing, because it's going to be a thing, and nobody's talking about it, but it's actually a big problem that we should be concerned about. Anyway, this can kind of happen on any scale, right? Some markets are freer than others, right? You can't just sell people medicine, for example, without it being checked out, unless, of course, you call it a vitamin, in which case you can sell chalk and tell people it'll cure cancer. That's fine. Can thank neoliberalism for that one, too. But that's the concept, like that's the free market. Neoliberalism is a big proponent of a free market. They want a market that is as free as it can possibly be. And this is really, really good for people who are already wealthy, but it is really, really bad for people who are not wealthy, which is only a problem when most people are not wealthy. They're not jumping for the chance to vote for candidates who are looking to implement policies that are bad for them. And it's very hard to dress up a lot of neoliberalist policies and ideas, especially ones that really deregulate the market, without it being very clear that it's going to be bad for poor people and good for rich people. Like, a lot of economic policies can be dressed up in such a way that your average Joe thinks it's about freedom and limited federal government. Neoliberalism is about money. That is the only thing. That is the god of neoliberalism, is the dollar sign. It is literally things like stop requiring a minimum wage. Like, it's crazy. Like, neoliberalist policies are very hard to disguise as helpful to anybody other than the already ultra rich, which is why you need a distraction. You need a market crash or a natural disaster. You need a shock. Naomi Klein describes the shock doctrine as this: the original disaster, the coup, the terrorist attack, the market meltdown, the war, the tsunami, the hurricane, puts the entire population into a state of collective shock. The falling bombs, bursts of terror, the pounding winds serve to soften up whole societies as much as the blaring music and blows in the torture cells soften up prisoners. Like the terrorized prisoner who gives up the names of comrades and renounces his faith, shocked societies often give up things they would otherwise fiercely protect. Now, a note on that last quote. We know that torture doesn't work. And I believe that Naomi Klein also knows that torture doesn't work. More often than not, torturing someone is just going to make them lie. It's going to make them say whatever it is that you want them to say. Now, if what you want them to say is that you can have my rights, then they'll do that, right? It does work the way I think that she's saying, but I do just want to be clear that, like, the whole CIA enhanced interrogation techniques thing did not actually help anyone get any actual information. But the point stands that the shock doctrine is the neoliberal playbook for using disasters as cover to inject your own fucked up ideological economic strategies in order to further exploit the poor. What's interesting about the reveal of the vampires in True Blood is that it is the product of a disaster, right? We don't know specifically what was the trigger for them to develop this synthetic blood, but clearly something bad enough in universe must have happened to prompt that kind of research to be made. So the existence of this blood that facilitated their outing into the world is the product of a shock or a disaster itself. And the reveal of vampires, the act of coming out of the coffin, is also a shock, is also a disaster, because admittedly, fucking terrifying. Like, let's be perfectly honest. If all of the sudden, at the exact same time, everybody's TV and phones and Apple Watches, everybody's devices beep like it's an Amber Alert, and in thousands of languages across the world, there was just a broadcast about the existence of blood-sucking demon creatures, that would be pretty fucking terrifying. Like, I will give it to people. That's nightmare scenario. I know that we all think it would be fun. We all think that we would be Sookie Stackhouse. I probably actually would be Sookie Stackhouse because I've got a death wish, but the majority of us would not respond the way that Sookie Stackhouse does, because that's crazy. It's It is extremely disruptive and frankly terrifying. So when the vampires are outed, people are scared. They want to be protected, and they are not being protected. The government does nothing. They really just kind of stay out of it and are sort of leaving it up to the states to decree whether or not vampire marriage can happen, and they are really kind of just not making any calls on what's legal and what's not. In Thou Shalt Not Crave Thy Neighbor of True Blood, Sabrina Boyer writes, though there is still some legal ambiguity surrounding what rights vampires have, it is not legally acceptable to engage in vigilante justice against them. Socially, however, the southern citizens in Bonton don't necessarily have difficulty looking the other way. People are scared. And when people are scared and shocked and the government is not providing them services that they need, suddenly you have the rise of extremist groups run by... Where is she? Where is the Fellowship of the Sun? Oh my gosh, I totally did print one out. I don't know where it is. I lost my Fellowship of the Sun printout. I swore I printed it. Oh no. Whatever, they're fundamentalists anyway. The Fellowship of the Sun is a fundamentalist Christian organization that pops up in True Blood. And we sort of see and hear a little bit about them in the first couple sort of episodes, and there's sort of talks of them, but we really get introduced to them through Jason, our boy Jason. Jason Stackhouse, throughout the first season, finds himself the subject of a murder investigation. Kind of the central thing of season 1 is that all of the women that Jason Stackhouse sleeps with keep winding up dead. But poor boy, he really doesn't know. He really didn't do it. We know he didn't do it because he couldn't. No one else knows that, especially because there are several tapes of him having violent, aggressive sex with these women. It's consensual, but it doesn't look good when a woman is found strangled and there's a video of you strangling her. It's not looking great, my guy. So a lot of the first season is spent kind of trying to clear his name, right? Sookie's like trying to prove that he didn't do it. It turns out that these women were actually murdered because in addition to sleeping with Jason Stackhouse, they have also been sleeping with vampires. In the universe of True Blood, when you are a person who sleeps with a vampire, or just a person who is nice to vampires, you will often get dubbed a fangbanger, which is amazing. Like, amazing title. And the Queen Fangbanger title goes to our girl Ginger down here. This is Ginger. Ginger is one of Eric's like lackeys, posse people. I hope I remember to tell you the story about Fangtasia. She is classic fangbanger. So that's like a literal thing. It's also an insult that gets thrown around whenever someone is too nice to vampires, according to the anti-vampire folk. But that is why the women that Jason has been sleeping with end up dead. It turns out that they were being murdered by Arlene's boyfriend from Once Upon a Time, Renee, who was like living under another name. It's a whole thing. But this is a very traumatic experience for him, right? Also stressful for him that time that his grandmother got murdered in their kitchen because she allowed Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton to talk at her like Confederate girl book club thing. I don't know, but she got killed for that. So then his grandmother dies. And then on top of that, he ends up with a V addiction because he starts seeing this girl from like Connecticut, and she's just like very much like a rich girl on her like psychedelic era vibes. And she's just like, V really helps you connect to like the other side, like very end ends up first with a V addiction to the point where they kidnap a vampire, and then he feels really bad about that and they kill the vampire. So he's got all this guilt, and his life, he just feels like the existence of vampires has made his life worse in every possible conceivable way. And to his credit, he's right. He's right, because the nicest vampire that he knows is Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton, and he sucks. So he's also kind of dumb, and he's got not a lot of self-esteem and not a lot to do in his free time, and he finds himself being recruited by the Fellowship of the Sun. And the Fellowship of the Sun, run by our goddess queen in all her pitch perfect glory, Miss Anna Camp, just acting her little butt off. She's so fun. She's so good. And the Fellowship of the Sun are like a Westboro Baptist Church mock-up, right? They are a fundamentalist group that has arisen in the wake of the vampire shock to the world, and they are out here saying like, hey, this is against God. This is super not God's design. God hates fangs. And they offer him something that no one else was. They offer him a place to stay. They offer him food and shelter and meaning in his life, right? He is being trained. They tell him he's a soldier of the sun. And it's kind of shocking how easily he goes into this group and how easily he is swayed to the side of extremism because he is scared and there are no answers. They turn into later a full militia, like full military militia, especially once the guy dies and Anna Camp is in charge, because girly is girl bossing. She girl bosses the shit out of that fundamentalist religious cult, and they are ready for battle. We don't love them, but it is wild how fast she whips them into shape. Oh my god. Anyway, the point is that big shocks leave people desperate for guidance and vulnerable to persuasion. This happens in the real world too. We know that in the wake of shocks and disasters or global pandemics, fundamentalism rises. Naomi Klein says in an interview, Milton Friedman's vision of a correct society was one in which the only acceptable role for governments was to enforce contracts and police borders, and everything else should be left to the market. So as this ideology has triumphed around the world, you see the disappearance of a state that provides real services to its citizens and even non-citizens. And you see the disappearance of public spaces, non-market spaces to convene. We saw this really intensely with COVID. People had nowhere to go. They were not being provided adequate answers, and we had no place to go. And that's not necessarily the fault of the government, but like you couldn't leave your house, so there's only online spaces. And we saw the rise of these extremist sort of online groups and communities like Andrew Tate and the Manosphere and just fundies in general, tradwives, and they're sucked into these communities because they're not being provided any other alternatives. And also the apps. Pipelines on the apps are also a problem, but the principle is the same, right? If people are starving and the government is not feeding them, the church will feed them. That is the loophole, that is the paradox of Christian charity work that they have been manipulating and exploiting for centuries. And this isn't the only character that this happens to either, right? So while all this is happening, the Fellowship of the Sun secretly has Eric Northman's maker Godric in a freezer in the basement. They've kidnapped a vampire. And Eric Northman has essentially tasked Sookie and Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton to find him, to help him find him. And so they are in Dallas, like, trying to find him, trying to figure all of that out. And they have abandoned my girl. They have abandoned Tara. They've left Tara alone with her crazy mother, and Tara ends up crashing her car and in prison one night. Now, remember when we told you that Tara goes through nothing but insane shit and is just put through the ringer? Tara during season 1, her like side gig, right? Her side plot is that her alcoholic mother has decided that she has a demon inside of her and needs it to be exorcised. So she basically comes to Tara, asks her for money. It's like all of Tara's savings. I think Tara also even borrows money from someone at some point to get her mother this exorcism, and it works. She stops drinking, right? She says that it was just a demon. The lady then convinces Tara that Tara has a demon inside of her, and Tara again spends a whole bunch of her money to get this demon out of her. She finds out quickly after that this lady was just a scam, and it's just the placebo effect on her mother. The woman ends up dead. It's a whole thing. So she's like in the dumps, and she crashes her car at one point and ends up in prison with a totaled car. And her mother comes to visit her and then decides to leave her in jail to teach her a lesson. Tara's mother is a disappointment every single time that she is on screen. Her mother is so horrible and it is just heartbreaking, and it drives me crazy. So Tara is there and she is vulnerable, and her friends are gone. Nobody's there. They've abandoned her. She doesn't have anybody. except for this random lady, Marianne, who rocks up into the jail and is like, let me give you a ride home in my car, my very nice fancy car. And she doesn't. She takes her back to this fancy mansion and she tells her she can stay, and she gives her food and she gives her shelter, and she makes her feel loved and wanted and needed. She gives her all of the things that her family is not giving her. And the next thing you know, she has moved her crazy cult into Sookie's house, and they are awaiting a demon god to come and have sex with Marianne so that they can ascend to greatness. It's a whole thing that I can't get into, but it's the same principle with just like Terra individually, with a country at large, right? When the state fails to provide these resources and is only providing oppressive social controls like prisons and surveillance, then the gaps are filled by other organization. Those needs for community and non-market-based places and activities and resources are provided by other forces, often religious, often fundamentalist. If the government's not giving communities what they need, then other groups are going to rise up and give them those things. Point is, neoliberals love disasters for this reason. In 1982, real-life boogeyman and certified Republican bedwetter Milton Friedman wrote, "Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable." The thing about capitalism and neoliberalism and this shock doctrine is that it is intentional. It's not just that it happens, it's that these people, these groups, are waiting for a disaster or hoping to create one and incite one in order to execute their plans. The United States did not give Louisiana the money that it needed to come up with its own disaster preparedness plan. They paid somebody else. And then when it came time to actually need to implement any of that, they did not give them the money to do so. Instead, 14 days after the levees were breached, known evil society of incels with bad breath and trust funds, the Heritage Foundation, sat down with a bunch of Republican officials and like-minded individuals to draft up a list of pro-free market ideas for responding to Hurricane Katrina and high gas prices. The evil villains didn't even give Hurricane Katrina its own list. They lumped it in with high gas prices, and then they quickly repackaged this list and sold it back to the American people as hurricane relief. This list included suspending a law that required federal contractors pay a living wage, making the entire affected area a flat tax-free enterprise zone, make the entire region an economic competitiveness zone, comprehensive tax incentives, and waiving regulations. Meanwhile, the government was also contracting out everything from trailer park developments to medical care, food, water, and transport, security, even the retrieval of the dead was a task reserved exclusively for private enterprise. Volunteers were barred from entering the homes of their loved ones to retrieve their families and their own dead. Instead, that task was exclusively assigned to a company that charged over $1,000 per body. And if you're wondering why, if you're like, that doesn't make a lot of sense, why would they want to pay companies more than having free labor? That doesn't make sense. Wouldn't they want people to do something for free? Yeah, they would. Except why would you have someone do it for free when you can pay a company to do it? And then in 9 months, when it's election time, that company will just pay you via campaign donations. The government poured money into private companies during this disaster, and those private companies poured that money right back into the government come election time. This is disaster capitalism. You thought it couldn't get worse. Part 3 or 4, part whatever. It gets worse. It gets worse, doesn't it? Sorry, this angle, you can't really see her when she pops in. Someone commented on one of my videos that I need to stop sitting in chairs because I look more comfortable when I'm sitting on anything that's not a chair. So at the start of the show, Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton has returned to his hometown of Bonton. That's where he's from. And he's returned because the last living descendant of his family has died, And I'm pretty sure that that means that he can just go in his house and buy the house again. He couldn't like go in or buy it without the deed. I don't know, something like that. One of the issues that he mentions having when he first meets Sookie is that he doesn't have any electricity in the house. The electricity's not on and needs to get fixed, but he can't find an electrician who will come out at night because vampires in this universe are literally nocturnal. It's unclear from the show if this is like a physical thing, if they physically are that like sleep during the day and only wake up at night, or if it is more of just like it makes more sense to adjust your sleep schedule so that you sleep during the day. But anyway, Sookie, to be flirty and helpful and cute, also because she's so much smarter than Bill, she just like picks up a phone book, calls a bunch of electricians, and finds ones that are willing to come out at night. And she goes over to his house to give him this list and be like, ooh, I'm helping you. Oh my goodness. Love me. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that this is when there's like a bunch of other vampires there having like a weird random vampire orgy and playing the Wii, if I remember. And it's not super explained or followed up on. Bill is like, you're mine, she's mine, nobody touch her. I don't know. And then they go to Boston. No, they go to Dallas. They go somewhere. I don't care about what Bill Compton is doing on the show. It's why this video is weird. I skipped a lot of Bill Compton related things in the show, okay? Point that I'm making is that she finds specific electricians who are willing to come out at night and serve vampires, because there are electricians who are not willing to come out at night and serve vampires, because vampires needing electricians to come out at night is a new thing. So this opens up an opportunity for maybe electricians whose business isn't doing super well to charge vampires crazy amounts of money and to come out at night. And they're like, I'll come out at night. I don't have anything else to do. And this kind of thing goes for like all household services, stores, mailing services, all of the things that would normally only be open during the day can now be open 24 hours a day, because this is a new market. The vampires being outed opens up a new market. And this is huge for disaster capitalism. New markets being opened is step one, right? It is perk number one of disaster capitalism, because this happens every time. Naomi Klein writes, within weeks, the Gulf Coast became the domestic laboratory for the same kind of government run by contractors that had been pioneered in Iraq. Blackwater was hired for security protection of FEMA employees from looters. Blackwater is a private security company, the company that in 2007 opened fire in Nusar Square in Baghdad, killing 14 civilians and wounding 17. Employees were tried and convicted in a federal court, one of murder and the other 3 of manslaughter and firearm charges. But don't get too excited about that. Justice was not truly served, because in 2020, all 4 of the convicted were pardoned by Donald Trump. Just to be clear, Blackwater was only in Baghdad because they were hired by the United States government to be there. And it's not even like they are using these funds efficiently, right? It's not even like they're making a smart economic decision by hiring these private companies, because the contracts were valued at $8.7 billion. Congressional investigations of the Katrina contracts found significant overcharges, wasteful spending, and mismanagement. FEMA paid a private company $175 a square foot to install blue tarps on a damaged roof, even though those tarps were provided by the government. Once all of the subcontractors took their shares, the workers who actually physically installed those tarps were paid as little as $2 a square foot. The overspending on these private contractors was so bad that in November of 2005, the government needed to offset these billions of dollars that were being paid out to private contractors. So the Republican-controlled Congress at the time announced $40 billion in cuts from federal budget programs, including student loans, Medicaid, and food stamps. The Bush administration refused to allow emergency funds to pay for public sector salaries, and the city of New Orleans, which lost its tax base, had to fire 3,000 workers in the months after Katrina. These private companies were not even hiring local people who were out of work to do the work. They weren't allowed. It all was kept private and expensive. Millions of public dollars went to outside consultants, many of whom were powerful real estate developers. And of course, thousands of teachers were also fired, paving the way for the conversion of dozens of public schools into charter schools, just as Friedman had called for. The success of disaster capitalism in generating profit for these private companies also sparked an entirely new industry of disaster preparedness. HelpJet was launched by an airline in West Palm Beach, Florida, billing itself as the first hurricane escape plan that turns a hurricane evacuation into a jet-setter vacation. And they would book holidays when a storm was expected to hit, and you would be whisked away on a private jet off to a vacation while the hurricane hit your home. Crazy. But we saw it there, and we saw it with COVID too. You see all kinds of industries that crop up, right? I had a job at a preschool during COVID when it first hit, and every week we would be COVID tested. And it was just some company that was started to go into places and do weekly COVID testing. But that was just a private company that flourished in the wake of this disaster for that purpose. Delivery services in COVID, everything moving online. We saw a whole new industry be created post-COVID. And it happened after Katrina. And it happens in True Blood. It happens in True Blood in the wake of the vampires coming out of the coffin. Not only do we have this new product, this True Blood, to sell to the vampires, but you have this entire new market of people to service to, and 12 more hours in the day to do it. You have a new subset of humans, essentially, that may or may not have been buying things, technically speaking, since they're legally dead, but now you can market to them. Vampire-specific products can be designed to cater to their lifestyle. During season 2, when I told you when Sookie and Bill are off doing like Nancy Drew stuff, they're trying to find Godric. Godric is the like teenage maker of Eric, who's being held captive by the church that Jason is being recruited by. While they're on that adventure, they go to a hotel in Dallas, Hotel Carmilla. Amazing. Anyway, there's a vampire hotel, Hotel Carmilla. This is a vampire hotel that is light tight. Light tight is what they call it when you make a space impossible for light to get through, right? So there's no windows, everything is like barred perfectly, so they can walk around freely during the day, which means that like humans and vampires can interact on a better schedule. And it caters to humans, there's food, and vampires, there's True Blood, and it functions very much in service of vampires. Fangtasia is a bar mostly for vampires that also services humans who want to hang out with vampires, but it's primarily a vampire bar. They primarily are selling True Blood, facilitating situations where people who want to be eaten by vampires are allowed to consent and be eaten by vampires, right? It's a great idea. It's a genius idea. You know whose idea it was, by the way? It's brilliant. Eric really hit the nail on the head there. Well, I say Eric hit the nail on the head. Eric didn't hit the nail on the head. Pam hit the nail on the head. Quick side tangent to talk about Pam. This is Pam. Pam is Eric's progeny. I may have talked about this earlier, but Pam is Eric's progeny, and Pam is iconic. I think she's my favorite character. She's definitely up there. She's so funny. She's so gorgeous. And she supposedly came up with the idea for Fangtasia. This is the lore that we are told, that it was her idea. And she brought it to Eric, and Eric was like, that's genius. And it was super successful, and they love this bar. It's like their pride and joy. It's home for them. It's really sad in later seasons when the bar is getting like seized by vampire governments. It's a big bummer, but they love this bar. They did such a great job with this bar that in the last season, Eric's dying and he abandons Pam, which is super rude, right? Oh, did I explain maker rules? Eric is like, oh, my progeny had this great idea for this bar. Isn't she so great? Aren't I such a great dad? Wow, Love this for me. It's all hunky-dory. Things deteriorate in the end in the later seasons. There is a blood-borne vampire disease that comes around. We're going to get to it, don't worry. And Eric runs away, and he does something real fucked up, which is he releases Pam. So he releases Pam, which means that she doesn't have to follow his commands. And you would think that's a good thing, but in the framing of the show, the connection between a maker and their vampire child person is really, really intense. And it's family and then some. And it's also like magical. So they have to do something. If you say like, as your maker, I command you, then the progeny has to do it, right? We see Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton do this to his vampire daughter, Jessica, in early seasons. She's like, I'm not leaving. And he's like, as your maker, I command you to leave. And she drives away and she can't stop it. We also see her later in seasons when he starts calling her to come, be physically unable to prevent it, and it feels like her heart is being ripped out of her chest. She gets like dragged across state lines because he said, come here. So it's very intense and it's very emotional, very, very emotional. And Pam and Eric are super tight. Pam is one of the only vampires that Eric has ever made. He makes one other. We don't need to worry about her. And he releases her, and it's a big deal. It's very dramatic. She's like, don't you dare. But he does, because he's going to go off and like die a martyr's death or something like that. But because Pam's a badass and Pam doesn't fuck around, Pam finds him. She finds him very easily, and she's like, get it together. We have money to make, my friend. Remember when I came up with that great idea for a bar? I know what I'm talking about. Listen to me. Let's go. And I don't remember what it is that prompts her, but she, for whatever reason, she is prompted to tell him the story of Fangtasia. And the story of Fangtasia is that years before vampires were outed, Eric gets assigned to be sheriff of that part of Louisiana. And he and Pam are sort of assigned this DVD store as like cover, or maybe to make money and pay taxes. I don't know. But they run this DVD store. They hate it, especially Pam. But they have a regular. There's a regular in this DVD store. Ginger. Ginger's a regular in this DVD store, and she fucking loves vampires. She thinks they're so fun. She's so into vampire movies. And when vampires come out of the coffin, she's like, you know what would be so fun, you guys, my best friends? What if we had a bar? What if we had a bar? What if we had a bar for vampires and people like me who want to bang vampires? What if we gave Eric a throne? Wouldn't that be so cool? What if we called it Fangtasia? Isn't that a great name? And Pam is like, yes, that is a great idea. Now forget it. So she glamours Ginger to forget that it was her idea and is like, hey, Eric, I came up with this great plan. And they just live that way for years. And it's so funny and it's so iconic because he finds out and he just goes, you are such a bitch. And it's true. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. That's the kind of capitalism I can get behind, okay? I'm here for that. I'm here for it. Anyway, Ginger had the right idea. She was like, hey, you have this whole new type of person that you can market to. People who want to have sex with vampires. There's also vampire legal services because vampires are not legally recognized citizens when they first come out of the coffin. So they have to find loopholes and ways around various laws and whatnot. In later seasons, Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton is dying finally, and he's trying to make sure that all of his assets go to his vampire progeny Jessica, because remember, I told you, he is the last Compton. So if he dies, like technically his money and stuff just goes to the state, it just goes to the government, and he wants it to go to Jessica. Except the law does not recognize progeny as a legal kinship, so he has to try and get his will changed because it won't just automatically go to her. She's not his next of kin, so he has to go to get his will changed. But his will was written in 1865 or whenever. So they're like, I'm pretty sure that's not. I think that's expired. I don't think you can change that anymore. And she's like, but you could adopt Jessica, but that would take like 6 or 7 months, which thank God Bill Compton does not have. which leads to like a whole extortion thing. They get extorted, which is, there's nothing more capitalist than extortion, right? The point is here that entire industries and services pop up in the wake of the vampire reveal the same way they pop up in the wake of other disasters and shocks. But it's not even just legal businesses. There's also this other entirely new, more illicit industry that pops up, which is the sale of V. I can't find paper, so I wrote it on an envelope. It says, vampire blood has this intoxicating effect on humans. Poor Jason Stackhouse learned the hard way that it also has the side effect of a permanent state of excitement. I think that's more ad friendly. Permanent state of excitement. Our man learns the hard way. And so that ends up being its own whole entire market, right? Even Queen Sophie Anne is sort of involved in that because she is using the exploitation of her own people's blood in order to fund her very lavish lifestyle, because she very much lives like a queen. And as she should. I support Queen Sophie Anne's wrongs all the time. She's so fun. She's probably my favorite character, even though she's barely in the show. Anyway, look, the point that I'm trying to make is not that the disasters are equal. I'm not saying that the reveal of vampires is the same as Hurricane Katrina or the same as COVID or something like that. I'm just saying that within True Blood, the reveal of vampires has the same function as a disaster in the real world. It produces the same kind of patterns. The reveal of vampires in True Blood acts as a shock to the economy and the world. But what's really interesting about vampires specifically, and vampirism as a metaphor for economy and capitalism historically, is that vampirism is a physical thing. Vampires don't come out of nowhere. They start as humans. So there's also a whole other element where becoming a vampire is a physical shock. Part whatever. Being a vampire is inherently exploitative. It's very much about taking and taking and taking and then leaving. A lot of the early vampire stories, Dracula and Carmilla and the Vampire, for example, are about these other vampires who are already vampires when the story begins, coming into the life of the human protagonist, wreaking some havoc, taking, and then leaving without any kind of consequence. That's sort of more or less what happens, right? They're about this external force coming and exploiting and sucking the life out of you. But then we also have a lot of stories where the protagonist is human and turns into a vampire. One of the reasons that the Black Vampire is considered to be the American response to John Polidori's The Vampire is not only because it's American, but because it doesn't see the exploitation as something that is entirely external. The main character of The Black Vampire is an enslaved man who, upon turning into a vampire, uses that power to enact revenge, to become the exploiter. He also uses that power to bestow mercy as well. That should also be noted, that he does turn Mr. Person and his wife back into humans. He leaves her pregnant with his vampire child, but there is a power dynamic there that is not seen in something like The Vampire, where the vampire is nothing but exploitative and sort of takes and does not give anything back in any way. And that's what makes Black vampire stories so interesting in general. The Guild of Stories by Jewel Gomez is something that we talked about in the Flowers in the Attic video. It is a Black lesbian vampire story. It explores another freed slave who is turned into a vampire, and it's a very physical, sensual experience. The dynamics of vampirism and power and exploitation, and how sort of vampirism interacts with the human world, is very straightforward in these white stories, but it's just so much more interesting, I think, in these stories about Black vampires. And again, I am clearly not the person to really be speaking on this with any level of authority. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the vampire is the exploiter, but the vampire is also the other. Robin Wood uses the phrase return of the repressed to describe the monster's intimate relationship with the social mainstream in horror. The monster is always sort of outcast. It's other because society cannot recognize it. Therefore, it must either be assimilated or annihilated. Even though vampirism and vampires have historically been a metaphor and a vehicle for stories about exploitation and capitalism, the vampire is also the other. The vampire is different. The vampire is not human. It is a monster. It's monster the same way that Frankenstein is a monster. It's monster the same way that werewolves and zombies are monsters. In Coming Out of the Coffin, The Vampire and Transnationalism in Twilight and the Sookie Stackhouse series, Deborah Much writes, the Gothic genre has long been used to address threats to racial or national purity, but in earlier Gothic texts, a clash of cultures would produce a hierarchy where one must vanquish the other. The fear arises from our inability to differentiate us from them, and from the similarities between us and them. Vampires deny us the comfort of neat binaries. These 19th century vampires act out colonial Britain's fears of hybridity and what Stephen D. Arata has referred to as reverse colonization, the possibility of making us like them. But in today's post-colonial or post-transnational globalized world, our vampires reflect our fears of new, changing, or dissolved boundaries. True Blood is very, very much going for the vampire minority allegory thing. It's not a secret. We have God hates fangs right in the title sequence. The Fellowship of the Sun is essentially the Westboro Baptist Church. The vampires are fighting for legal rights like things to marry, and even the showrunner has admitted that the connection is definitely there, but he does caution against reading that metaphor too far. Vampires are meant to be a repressed minority that society must recognize in order to live up to the ideals of justice and equality. But even the creator, Alan Ball, has stated that ultimately, if you latch onto that metaphor, the vampires are gays metaphor, and become really serious about it, it would make the show extremely homophobic. Because vampires are dangerous. They kill. They're amoral, a lot of them. I don't think that's what it is. I think that's just a nice little detail in what is hopefully a big popcorn thrill ride. And he's ultimately right. Ultimately, True Blood does not do a great job with this. If you take this metaphor to its extremes, it doesn't really hold up. Sabrina Boyer writes, of True Blood, despite the otherness and isolation the South may have experienced and perpetuated, the series fails to align its racist history with either its positive portrayal of friendliness and charm or its representation of the grotesque. Lafayette, while not an actual vampire, occupies the border between a human and a monster who deals in the world of vampires as a job and as a sexual and racial monster that has historically and currently been a social outcast, often captured or annihilated. The fact that the actual production of True Blood is extremely racist in the way that it treats Tara and Lafayette, it's hard to imagine that the content of the show itself would be any different. It doesn't navigate that conversation with a lot of grace. Apart from the fact that, like, of course, the only black male character that you have in your show sells drugs. He and Tara both experience this. They're either constantly being captured and molded and changed and abused, or they're literally written out of the show at parts. It's really, really frustrating and really, really sad, actually. The amount of times that Tara is treated kindly by someone who is literally just going to turn around and abuse her in some of the most violent ways that a person can be abused is crazy. Like, I said it in the beginning, like, I genuinely, it gets really uncomfortable after a couple of seasons. After the whole debacle with the crazy sex god cult thing that happens, her boyfriend from there is killed. And almost immediately after, the next thing that happens to her is she has a one-night stand, and she is not not trying to get involved with anybody because she's trying to keep herself safe, but he wears her down and she's like, maybe I need to open my heart up to people. Maybe I'm too closed off. And he fucking kidnaps her and takes her to like a vampire mansion, a vampire governor's mansion in Missouri, and it's being guarded by werewolves, and he sexually assaults her and he rapes her, and it's horrible. And she has to play along to get out to save Sookie's ass and Vampire Bill Compton's ass, even though they have not been there or done anything for her in seasons. And she still ends up alone. It's nuts. The best thing that ever happens to Tara is when she leaves town, discovers that she's a little bit gay, aren't we all? Anyway, the point is, in addition to the straightforward capitalism metaphor, the vampire also has a long sordid history as being the other, as representative of a physical difference and being visibly or physically separate from humanity. Obviously, doing any kind of monster is a metaphor for the other thing is always tricky and difficult and messy. It's never going to be perfect. That doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't do it. It just means that it's going to be a minefield that you have to navigate. And True Blood stumbles very roughly and violently through this metaphor. Boyer writes, the series, while it attempts to counter the hegemonic forces surrounding racism in our culture, doesn't critically engage with the fact that people of color, because of their skin or when in the act of passing they are discovered, are immediately otherized. Unlike sexuality or alternative sexual practices as actions that tend to happen behind closed doors, skin is a part of the body, that which is always under scrutiny and public viewing. What is problematic about this imagery is that vampires can hide their status as vampires. Unless they are touched or aroused in some sort of way, they can typically pass as human. However, people of color cannot always pass as white. It's not nearly as bad, I think, as Discovery of Witches overall, but when it's bad, it's bad. The message that the show is trying or not trying to portray aside, the way that it treats vampire blood and the physical act of changing and the vampire as like a being and the bodily functions of vampirism is really, really interesting because of because of this vampire blood thing, right? Vampire blood makes humans high as fucking kites. It will heal you from injuries, but that's not nearly as widely known as the fact that if you're not injured, it's going to shoot you to the moon, my friends. And this has a lot of implications because vampirism is about exploitation, even on that physical level. You are just literally sucking the blood and the life from another being. Vampires are supposed to be these creatures who take and take and take and take and never give anything back. But in True Blood, the concept of V and of vampire blood being a drug and not just a healing agent opens up this can of worms for a symbiotic relationship between humans and vampires, especially when it comes to sexy times. This show is so horny. Oh my God. Like, thank you, Rocket Money, for sponsoring this video because it is not gonna make it past the monetization police. There's no way. You know how in like Sex and the City, they say that like New York City is a character, right? Or like Gossip Girl, it's like New York City is a character of its own. I feel like in True Blood, sex is a character of its own. Okay, the concept of it, the act of it is dirty and clinical, it's emotional and passionate, it is violent and tender. It's you see sex in every possible form it could be in. And I struggle with a show like this because I feel like a voyeur. I feel like I'm watching something that I should not be watching. I feel like I didn't get these people's consent, but it does desensitize you to it. Like, it's intercut with so much blood and violence that you are sort of destabilized, right? Almost like a shock. And it's clearly intentional because even the opening credit sequence, which I think is great, I never skip it. That song is such a bop. And you came in, the air went out. Then every shadow filled up with doubt. It's so good. The opening sequence is such a bop. But that is like decaying corpses of roadkill intercut with hot, sexy times. The show is clearly priming you for this connection. It's clearly trying to blur the lines there. And it's not the first vampire media to do that. Blood drinking and erotica is not new to the vampire genre at all whatsoever. The Guild of Stories that I talked about has an extremely erotic blood drinking, blood sharing scene. Carmilla as well is a full-on orgasm. It's the only way to describe what happens in Carmilla. It's so funny that people think that it's not that. That's crazy. It's also often, especially in the older Gothic stuff like Dracula and the vampire, it's often seen as questionably consensual. It's explicitly violent. The blood drinking is very clearly a metaphor for rape. So I think it's really interesting the way that True Blood works to desensitize you to both the violence and the intimacy of violence and intimacy separately and together. Because it also has a really intense focus on intimacy and connection in non-sexual ways, right? So there is this correlation between violence and erotica and sex, and then there's also just regular violence, and then there's regular sex, and there's this other third thing, this other third kind of intimacy that we see in things like the maker and progeny bond and connection, right? Pam is at one point in therapy because I think I'm going to talk about it later, but the Fellowship of the Sun becomes like a military and they kidnap a bunch of vampires, and Pam unfortunately is one of those vampires, and they find her so interesting and so sexy that they want to study her psychologically. They're like, all these other vampires are dumb. They're level 3. We just study their physical ability. We want to know what you're thinking. And she's like, no. And they're like, if you tell us what you're thinking, we'll let you drink from this consenting human woman. And she's so hot. And Pam is like, what do you want to know? And because Pam also doesn't care that much, she is honest. Like, she's not gonna lie. She's like, so she just does therapy. And they ask her about her bond with Eric and the maker's bond. And she explains to the therapist that it is a physical, magical thing that she can't control, but also that the maker does have the ability to release their progeny, right? And I think the therapist, if I remember correctly, is like, oh, well, that's good. And Pam's like, no, not good. It's like, no, it's terrible. It's so bad. It's the rudest thing you can possibly do. It would leave me heartbroken and with half a soul. And it's horrible. And we see later when Eric does release Pam against her will that it fucks her up hardcore. And that is not really a sexual relationship between the two. And as I say that, I'm trying to remember if they ever actually have sex. And I don't think they do, but B, I don't think it matters because the relationship is just so different. It's such an, if they did, it would not mean the same thing that it means when Eric sleeps with Sookie, because what it means when Eric sleeps with Sookie is true love. I'm so mentally stable. I have such healthy attachment styles. Anyway, that said, Pam turns Tara into a vampire because Sookie begs her to, even though vampires have done nothing but make Tara's life miserable, and Tara had recently left town and was only dragged back by Sookie into her mess. And Pam loves the shit out of Tara, and they kiss at one point, and it's a little bit sexy, but it's also not sexual, right? The family bonds and the family relationships in this show are very interesting and very gothic, right? In the Flowers in the Attic video, we talked about this a lot, about how the family lines and family boundaries were just not enforced in that story. And that's part of a lot of Gothic literature, especially Southern Gothic, especially like American Southern Gothic literature and vampire tales really does like to play with this. Particularly, I'm thinking about in Interview with a Vampire, when Claudia just kind of says, I am your sister now. Don't call me your daughter. If you're not going to have sex with me, I want to be your sister. That like, it's this sort of verbal acknowledgement and like just decision to change the family structures like that. True Blood is clearly also doing that and also playing with that, because we have these kind of maker relationships that are somewhere between guardian and caretaker and lover and friend and sibling and something in the middle. And then we also have this relationship between Confederate vampire soldier Bill fuck-ass Compton and Jessica, who is very much his daughter, like just acts like a teenage daughter, acts like Bill's daughter. Bill treats her like a daughter. It's very much a traditional father and daughter relationship in that sense. So much so that it's sort of paralleled a bunch with Bill's actual dead human children. And I just find that really interesting about the show. I think that it all comes back to the blood and the physical. One of the questions that is asked, I think, by Tara early on in season 1 is whether or not vampires can truly love another person. I think that she asks that when Bill is sort of watching over Sookie like a creep. She asks, do you think they can really love another person? And this question comes up a lot in the first season, in the first couple seasons. And when she asks this question, the answer is very obviously yes, right? We are supposed to understand that that's bigoted, that she seeing these people as other. And I think part of what True Blood does successfully and interestingly through the desensitization and through all of the blood and sex and gore and love and hate being boiled together is level the playing field to a degree. The vampires are being exploited, but they also exploit. And the humans are being exploited, and they also exploit. The show works really hard, especially in the first few seasons, to emphasize that vampires are not the only monsters. And the concept of V and vampire blood being a drug that humans can exploit plays a huge role in this. One of the first things that happens in literally the first episode is that two people try to kidnap Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton. Unfortunately, not because they know him. Unfortunately, they are not technically speaking justified at this time in the narrative in their attempt to kidnap Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton, because they don't know him. They just know that he's a vampire and they want vampire blood. Vampires in this universe have a weakness to silver. So silver chains, silver bullets, that's another thing that becomes a whole industry. They are trying to kidnap him with some silver chains. They are unsuccessful because Sookie stops them, but Bill is so injured that he has to drink her blood in order to save himself. So Bill has Sookie's blood in his system. Then the V addicts are so mad about this. They're so mad that they were thwarted by this 5'2" waitress that they come back to literally kill her, which forces Confederate soldier vampire Bill Compton to save her life by giving her his blood. And this is all within the first and second episode. And because they are both in each other's veins, literally, this gives Sookie sexy heightened senses. So all of her food tastes better and she's super and strong and awake all the time and feels great. And it gives Bill this ability to notice and know when she is in trouble and in danger. So Sookie gets sexy spidey senses and a good sex drive, and Bill gets caution sign spidey senses. I don't know, and I don't care. What's important here is that for them, because they end up in a relationship against my better judgment, is that this is like a symbiotic thing. This becomes a thing for them. It's a very consensual relationship. He's like, hey, you should probably take B12 if we want to do this again, if you don't mind. And she's like, totally down, super down for that. They share each other's blood. It's this like intimate thing. And it's also a big kind of sexual awakening for Sookie. She comes into herself because she feels really free. Also because vampires are the only thoughts that she can't hear. Remember, she's a telepath. She hears everybody's thoughts all the time except for vampires. So they both are getting something out of this relationship, unfortunately. He's just so annoying. But that's not always the way that it goes. And we also have Jason and his like annoying Connecticut hippie girlfriend. Remember, I told you they kidnap a guy. And this poor old guy, oh my God, my guy, little old gay man, and he just got turned into a vampire and he doesn't really know what he's doing. He hasn't even figured out how to glamour people yet, and he just wants to like sit at home and watch his soap operas, and they kidnap him, and it's horrible, and it's shown as a bad thing. It's seen as bad. They're not good for doing this. They are evil for this. He dies and it's sad. The main villain of the show in season 1 is not a vampire. A vampire is not killing these women. A human is killing these women because they are partial to and not mean to vampires. But Jason doesn't get this. Remember, Jason doesn't see it this way. It takes him a long time to understand that being anti-vampire is being racist. He gets there. He does get there. I will say. He gets there because, do I explain the fairy thing? He gets a vision. He gets a vision from a fairy who killed his parents. He gets a fairy vision about his dead parents, and his dead parents are being super racist, and he tells everybody. He cannot stop telling everybody about how racist his dead parents are in his visions and dreams. It's luckily Tara and Lafayette have been basically written out of the show and are probably off in some unfortunate scenario of their own. So they're not here to hear it, but it does remind you of when white people just like constantly tell people of color, like, oh my God, yeah, my grandfather's so MAGA. Oh my God, he's such a racist. And you're like, you don't need to tell people that. You don't need to. Anyway, he gets there eventually. My guy does. Point is, humans found a way to bottle this synthetic blood so that vampires don't need to exploit them anymore to live. And then they sort of immediately found a way to exploit the vampires back. And because the vampires do have some weaknesses, they do have a weakness to silver and sunlight, despite the fact that vampires are stronger and faster and can glamour people, humans are able to maintain a level of dominance over the vampire because they have the numbers and they have the structure. They are able to develop silver bullets. We see later that they're able to develop contact lenses that prevent glamoring. They are able to exploit the vampire without themselves being exploited because they have this true blood. So what we see in True Blood is vampires who are historically the metaphor for capitalism themselves falling victim to literal human capitalism in the wake of their own revelation, in the wake of their own shock. They didn't know how to harness it. They didn't know how to take advantage of that shock because they have not been doing capitalism for 200 years. They didn't think. By all accounts, vampires should have been able to use their own introduction into the world to become the new world order. They should have been able to, according to the shock doctrine and disaster capitalism, win. They should have been able to be successful, but they weren't. Godric says, after thousands of years, we haven't evolved. We've grown more brutal, more predatory. Bet you thought we couldn't wrap it back around. Bet you thought I was totally over the capitalism thing and we were just talking about sex. Sex, drugs, and neoliberalism. That's the theme. I don't think I'm too drunk to keep going. I can't be because I have a deadline. I've got 2 pages left. Part 3, structure, sociology, mainstreaming. The 4th and 5th seasons of True Blood have so much going on. I really can't get into the details of it. The 4th and 5th seasons of True Blood are very busy. They're very complicated. There's a lot that's going on. I can't get into all of it. But what you need to know is that throughout the 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th seasons, whatever. The vampires are super wrapped up in their own shit. They are very, very invested in their authorities and chancellors and kings of Mississippi and the sheriff of this and who's doing this. And they're so focused on world domination and being vampire gods and wiping out humanity or whatever. They're doing it with brute force. They're killing people and they're bargaining with power and loyalty and vengeance instead of bargaining with what they should be bargaining with, which is money. In Machiavelli, Political Intrigues and True Blood, Antonio Sana writes, vampires, or those who politically act like them, have not actually evolved. In the world of True Blood, they have been living for centuries according to a political system that is inadequate to contemporary times. In the TV series, vampire characters who have authority and power over other members of their supernatural community are continually enveloped in a complex series of plots and betrayals. Vampire society is structured along severe lines of authority that would be unacceptable for contemporary human beings because it is based on a feudal political system and is founded on belief in the absolute power of kings and queens. They are so busy worrying about who is aligned with who and how they are going to snuff each other out with wooden stakes and fairy magic that they don't notice the Fellowship of the Sun and Queen Anacamp creating a militia and an army. They don't notice it. They're so busy fighting this vampire princess. She's like a princess who is friends with Jesus. They're so busy worrying about her and her cult of Lilith and how Confederate vampire Bill Compton, who has since done like a 180 plot twist. He was evil the whole time. I knew. Nobody knew but me, apparently. In an attempt to force vampires back into being vicious and killing humans, a 2,000-year-old Judean princess named Salome and her weird vampire cult, they bomb a bunch of True Blood factories, right? So now there's a shortage of True Blood. It's an economic shock and a physical shock, right? A physical disaster. There's a shortage of something that people need to live on. Extremely dangerous because when that blood runs out, the only other option is going to be killing people. It's the perfect scenario, and they're not prepared for it. The vampire world doesn't know how to fix the problem, and they don't know how to capitalize on it. They're not capitalism minded. They come from this feudal system. They come from the strongest will out, this brute force, aggressive, appointed loyalty, authority minded system. So they were never out here trying to synthesize their own true blood to compete with the one that the humans made. They were never competing with the human invented true blood, and they were never coming up with ways to possibly profit off of a shortage. You know who was? Humans, not Suki, but humans. Humans, while all the vampires were busy playing Machiavelli's treasure trove, the humans were playing Monopoly. The humans have been developing anti-glamour contact lenses, selling silver bullets, and the humans have been taking advantage of the lack of government regulation and intervention on all of this and allowing the Fellowship of the Sun to create a pseudo-military that is funded well enough to create a detention center where they can kidnap and execute research on vampires, as well as research independently into a disease that will only affect the blood of vampires. While the governor of Louisiana, I think, has legalized vampire hunting in his area because he can do that. And before we know it, a bunch of our heroes are kidnapped in this detention center. They are trapped in this facility while the same scientists who engineered True Blood in the first place have now perfected Hep V. Hep V, a not at all un-AIDS-like disease, a blood disease that can wipe out and kill vampires extremely quickly. And those humans who had like a vague plan of trying to introduce this Hep V into the vampire human world to wipe out all vampires, this is Christmas for them because they see this bombing of True Blood factories and they're like, that's amazing. Let's spike one singular factory's blood supply with this Hep V. And since they're not getting it anywhere else, they're all going to get it here. Evil capitalist genius enough, and certainly appeases the crazy anti-vampire religious folks, but that's not God here. Remember, God here is the dollar sign. The God here is money. And if you kill every vampire ever, who are you going to sell True Blood to? Who's going to run the vampire hotels? Who are you going to exploit? That's wiping out an entire market. You're not going to do that. So while you let the crazy religious folk think that they're going to wipe out all the vampires, the scientists and the rich low-key mafia guys have also developed a cure. Of course they did. They created an antidote. And you know what they do with that antidote? They sell it. They bottle and sell that antidote. And you know who helps them do it? We'll get there. So while Confederate vampire soldier Bill Compton is busy clawing his way to the top of the vampire pyramid and fighting for the physical, political control of vampire territories, this other shadowy group of humans, mostly humans, are able to slide in and profit off of the crisis that he has created. Because we found out that, like, he was sent to find out what the deal was with Sookie. We find out that he was being a lying, dirty cheater the whole time. I can't explain all of it. And because this is a free market, Eric and Pam are also able to profit off of this because Eric and Pam help track down the antidote, which is in Anna Camp's blood. If you can't beat them, join them. They work with the mafia science dudes to synthesize and bottle this cure, and they make out like bandits. They adapted. Eric and Pam mainstreamed in the truest sense of the word. They became capitalists, and there's not really anything more American than that, you know? Like every member of the oldest profession, I'm a capitalist. And Bill Compton dies, which is very sad. Not that Bill Compton dies, but that this is how the show chooses to end. Because in a lot of stories about the other, like in classic horror stories, the other, the monster, always ends up either annihilated or assimilated, right? Those are the options. The other is never really allowed to exist as itself amongst the not other, the us. And that's kind of part of why these narratives of the other and the monster being a metaphor or allegory for minorities or queer people or people of color, things like that, it's kind of why they tend to get really messy. The only way that I've seen it done really beautifully, I think, is in the Girl with All the Gifts, which is like a zombie book. And I'm just going to spoil it. It's like kid zombies. The like final solution is sort of like humans just gotta die and the zombie kids are just going to start a new world. Like that's kind of, they're just sort of like, this is evolution. It's hard to do. It's hard to navigate telling a story where the monster is representative of some kind of group, because the classic way of telling these stories and the way that people sort of almost can't help ending stories like this is with the monster either being annihilated or assimilating. And for a show that I think started off really strong in its attempts to desensitize you to violence and sex and difference, and started off really strong in its conviction that vampires are being discriminated against, and a show that just really came out like, we know that it's not perfect, just very camp and with a lot of balls and gusto with this type of narrative. To see that it kind of just sort of fizzled in the end, and it just went with this like, the old ways die, out with the old, in with the new. The center of our love triangle ends up pregnant with a human baby by some guy whose face we don't see. Like, it's just very weird. Cheersing. And like, Jessica's there. There is vampires there, but like, there's just something really ominous, I think, about the way that True Blood ends, because you have this world where feudalism was quite literally destroyed by capitalism, right? The whole sort of vampire system just kind of crumbles, and Bill Compton ends up just like a pile of bloody soup in a coffin. And as great as that scene is, and as and nasty in the best way, it's kind of sad to see the vampires lose their culture in the name of becoming capitalist overlords. Like, I'm happy for Eric and Pam. I love that for them. They deserve it. But it's a bummer. And like, you know, say what you will about love triangles. When you have a love triangle within a story like this, having Sookie, who is so pro being with a vampire, she meets a guy who's dating a vampire in like season 2, and she's so excited. And like, she's like, don't you love being in a relationship with someone who's different? Like, I'm different. Nobody's ever loved being in a relationship with me because I'm different. I love being with someone who's different. I'm really embracing these differences. It's a shame that she doesn't get to end up with someone who is different, that she ends up conforming. I was just floored with it because like the vampires, like, they win. But they don't get like equality. They just get like capitalism. And I think that they changed showrunners like halfway through, which is why they randomly have like an intense like FEMA Katrina based episode in like season 7, and they really stumble through that one too. But yeah, it sort of ends on this weak neoliberal like flail, because it doesn't even really feel poignant. It feels like they might have been trying to play on that thing that Godric says in the like season 1, which is that vampires are too far behind. They never evolved. Their methods are cruel and monstrous. But also like it was humans that created a disease to mass infect all of the vampires. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what? Like, what do you mean this is better? Like, what? This is crazy. At least Everybody's Shitty would have been a good ending, but like Bill kind of dies like a martyr too. It's very weird. It's very weird. I was super annoyed at having to sit through a Bill Compton redemption arc in season 7, and I was extra annoyed because I made a TikTok about it, and I was like, do not tell me that I have to sit through this. And everybody commented like, no, Bill Compton sucks, you're fine, don't worry. That was a redemption arc. I get that he died at the end, but she cries when he does it. I wouldn't have cried. Anyway, it's just a very strange ending. It's a very strange ending to a very strange show. I feel like I shouldn't have come out of 7 seasons of TV feeling like, maybe they should have stayed in the coffin. Get back in the closet. Maybe we should all get back in the closet. It's a joke. You do what you want. She also makes this whole thing about like keeping her fairy powers because she's a fairy. She's got fairy powers. And she like is keeping her fairy powers, but then also like, does she do anything with them? Like, what is that? If she gave up her fairy powers to kill Bill or kill all vampires, at least that would feel like a point. Like, at least that would feel like an ending. This really just sort of feels like, oh, that was a whole lot of trouble for nothing. We really didn't get anywhere. We really didn't learn anything. We really should have just stayed in the coffin. And Tara's dead. Oh my God. Ooh, I forgot to mention, they kill Tara off screen. I gasped. I hand to my mouth. And it's not because the actress suddenly was never available. She comes back for a flashback. Truly couldn't believe it. I was floored. And I really thought, even by that point in the show, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I know that she's just treated like shit. Like, I know that it's worse than I thought it could have possibly been. Off screen and in the arms of her crazy ass evil mother. It truly, like, if you think the way that they treated Bonnie on Vampire Diaries is bad, like, this is insane. Anyway, Jessica lives, which is great, but like, I don't know, the last shot is just Sookie pregnant by some unknown man. The grand ending is for her to settle down and add to the human population. Borderline eugenics? Crazy move by HBO. Truly. That's it. That's kind of all that I have to say about True Blood. I hope you enjoyed this. This is longer than I thought it was going to be. I went on a lot of tangents. Thank you to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. Thank you to you for watching this video. Thank you guys for streaming Carried Away. I think it hit like 20,000 streams, which is crazy. I have other new music coming out that I will be secretly tricking you into listening to. Some fun songs. I think that some of them have some very cool references that you're going to really like. Comment shout out from the last video, which was my Carried Away video. It goes to nondescript name. I just want to know how many cakes were harmed in the making of this great song. Thank you. And also, several people asked about how many cakes were used in the Carried Away video. One, because it was $16. I wanted like an $8 little thing, but that was the only cake at the like little independent grocery store near me. And it was old. It tasted like it was made too long ago, but I only had to use the one, which is why it looks disgusting, because I only had one to hit it. And by the third time I did the song, that thing was like a pile of cake there. It's why it looks gross in some of those. That wasn't intentional, but I think it's worth it. I think you're worth it. If you like these videos and you like my music and you would like to help me continue to make more of them, you can subscribe to my Patreon. I would not be able to do any of this without my Patreon supporters. It is genuinely one of the things I'm proudest of, and my greatest joy is I love that I get to make things and that people are willing to spare their change. It's very kind. As usual, sources for this video will be on my Patreon. They won't be behind a paywall. If you would like to join my Patreon, there is no limit to the tiers. You don't get special things for paying more. It's all pay what you can, basically. I'm very, very grateful. I really, really appreciate it. If you don't want to join my Patreon, that's fine. Just listen to my music. If you don't like my music, just put it on repeat and turn your sound off. New songs coming out soon. I also have a show in Brooklyn on June 27th. I'm playing a show. If you would like to come say hi, please do. Some people came at my last show all the way from Pittsburgh, which is crazy. Hi, that was so cool. And it made my whole day. You don't have to drive all the way from Pittsburgh, but people have been coming to my shows and I've gotten to meet you guys, which is the coolest and craziest thing in my life. So please continue to do that if you are able to do so, if you're in a position. If not, one day we're manifesting that I'll tour in your city and we'll be able to do it. So, yeah. But that's everything. You probably won't see me again until July, but when you do, you guys are going to lose your mind. It's not the Byron video. But it's close. It's a wild one. You guys are going to love it. I'm very excited. Comment your guesses of who you think the next video is on. It's an author, and it's going to be a wild ride. Okay. I love you the way that Pam loves to hate on Sookie Stackhouse, and I will see you in a couple months.